Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci, an Italian polymath of the High Renaissance, lived from 15 April 1452 to 2 May 1519, and worked as a painter, draftsman, engineer, scientist, florist, sculptor, and architect. He gained notoriety for his notebooks, in which he produced sketches and notes on a variety of topics, including anatomy, astronomy, botany, painting, and paleontology, even though his popularity primarily stemmed from his accomplishments as a painter. Only his younger contemporary, Michelangelo, has made a greater impact on following generations of painters than Leonardo, who is widely recognized as a genius and the embodiment of the Renaissance humanist ideal. He was schooled in Florence under the tutelage of the Italian painter and sculptor Andrea del Verrocchio. He was born out of wedlock to a prosperous notary and a lower-class woman in or around Vinci. He started in the city, but later spent a lot of time working with Ludovico Sforza in Milan. Later, he resumed his work in Florence and Milan, as well as for a brief period in Rome, all the while gaining a sizable fan base of imitators and students. He spent his final 3 years in France, at Francis's invitation, where he passed away in 1519. Since his passing, his accomplishments, varied interests, personal life, and empirical thinking have never failed to arouse curiosity and admiration, making him an often used moniker and cultural topic. One of the finest artists in art history, Leonardo is frequently considered as the father of the High Renaissance. He produced some of the most important paintings in Western art, despite having many lost works, and less than 25 major works that can be directly credited to him, including numerous incomplete pieces. His most well-known piece, and frequently recognized as the most well-known painting in the world, is the Mona Lisa, his greatest effort. His drawing of the Vitruvian Man is also considered as a cultural symbol, and the Last Supper is the religious painting that has been copied the most often in history. Leonardo is credited with creating Salvator Mundi, which was sold at auction for US $450.3 million in 2017, breaking the previous record for the most expensive painting ever sold at a public auction. He was revered for his technological prowess and invented the double hull, a form of armored war vehicle, concentrated solar power, flying machines, and ratio machines that could be utilized in addition to machines. Because current scientific methods for metallurgy and engineering were still in their infancy during the Renaissance, relatively few of his plans were built or even practical during his lifetime. But some of his minor creations, like an automated bobbin winder and a device for assessing the tensile strength of wire, entered the manufacturing sector unnoticed. He produced important discoveries in optics, tribology, hydrodynamics, geology, and civil engineering, but he never published his findings. Therefore, they had little to no immediate impact on subsequent science. Biography. Childhood, 1452–1472. Birth and upbringing. On April 15, 1452, in or around the Tuscan hill town of Vinci, which is located 20 miles from Florence, Leonardo da Vinci, officially known as Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci, was born. He was the child of lower-class Caterina de' Lippi and legal notary Piero da Vinci of Florence. Although it is still possible that Leonardo was born in a Florence home that Ser Piero almost certainly owned, the traditional account, from a local oral tradition recorded by the historian Emanuele Repetti, claims that he was born in Anciano, a rural hamlet that would have provided sufficient privacy for the illegitimate birth. The year after Leonardo was born, his parents got married in separate ceremonies. It is typically assumed that Caterina is the Caterina Butti del Vaca, who wed the neighborhood craftsman Antonio di Piero Butti del Vaca, also known as El Acatabriga. Caterina later appears in Leonardo's notebooks as just Caterina or Catlina. After being betrothed to Albiera Amadori the year before, Ser Piero married her, and after she died in 1464, he married 3 more times. Leonardo eventually had 16 half-siblings from all the marriages, who were all much younger than he was, and with whom he had very little interaction. Leonardo's potential birthplace and boyhood residence are located in Anciano, Vinci, Italy. Because of his biography in the usually apocryphal lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects, 1550, by the 16th century art historian Giorgio Vasari, very little is known about Leonardo's early years, and most of it is veiled in mystery. Tax records show that he resided in Antonio da Vinci's household by at least 1457, although it's conceivable that he spent the years before that in his mother's custody in Vinci, possibly in Anciano or Campo Zeppi in the parish of San Pantalone. Although it is believed that he and his uncle Francesco da Vinci were close, it is more likely that his father spent much of his time in Florence. Ser Piero, who came from a long line of notaries, had a prosperous profession and had at least maintained an official house in Florence by 1469. Despite his illustrious ancestry, Leonardo only had a fundamental and informal education in vernacular, writing, reading, and mathematics. This may be because his family chose to concentrate on his art. After all, they were aware of it early on. Leonardo later wrote down his first memories, which are now preserved in the Codex Atlanticus. He remembered an incident when a kite approached his cot as a baby and opened his mouth with its tail while writing about the flight of birds. Analysts now disagree whether the narrative was a real memory or a fiction. The Studio of Verrocchio. Verrocchio and Leonardo's The Baptism of Christ, 1472-1475, Uffizi Gallery. Leonardo's family relocated to Florence, which at the time was the epicenter of Christian humanist culture in the middle of the 1460s. He started working as a garzone, studio kid, when he was about 14 years old in the studio of Andrea del Verrocchio, the most prominent painter and sculptor in Florentine art at the time. This was around the time that Verrocchio's mentor, the famous sculptor Donatello, passed away. By the time he was 17 years old, Leonardo had become an apprentice and spent the next 7 years learning. Ghirlandaio, Perugino, Botticelli, and Lorenzo di Credi are among other renowned painters who either apprenticed at the school or were connected to it. Theoretical instruction and a broad range of technical skills such as drafting, chemistry, metallurgy, metalworking, plaster casting, leatherworking, mechanics, and woodworking, as well as aesthetic abilities such as drawing, painting, sculpting, and modeling, were all presented to Leonardo. Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, and Perugino, who were all a little older than Leonardo, were his contemporaries. They would have been waiting for him at the Verrocchio workshop or the Medici Platonic Academy. Florence was adorned by the creations of artists like Donatello's contemporaries, Masaccio, whose realistic and emotive figurative frescoes, and Ghiberti, whose gleaming gates of paradise demonstrated the skill of fusing intricate figure compositions with minute architectural backgrounds. The first painter to conduct a rigorous study of light, Piero della Francesca, had studied perspective in great detail. Younger painters, particularly Leonardo's views and artworks, were to be profoundly influenced by these studies and Leon Battista Alberti's treatise De Pictura. Verrocchio's assistants did the majority of the painting in his studio. Vasari claimed that Leonardo and Verrocchio worked together on their painting The Baptism of Christ, and that when Leonardo painted the young angel carrying Jesus' robe, it was so much better than his masters that Verrocchio put down his brush and never picked it up again. However, this is thought to be an apocryphal tale. The scenery, the rocks, visible through the brown mountain stream, and a large portion of the figure of Jesus, which attests to Leonardo's hand, are among the portions of the work that have been painted or touched up over the tempera, employing the new method of oil paint. 2 pieces by Verrocchio, the Archangel Raphael in Tobias, and the Angel and the Bronze Monument of David in the Bargello, may have been inspired by Leonardo. Vasari recounts an incident involving Leonardo when he was still very young. A local peasant constructed himself a round shield and asked Ser Piero to paint it. In response, Leonardo created a painting of a fire-spitting monster that was so terrible that his father decided to purchase a different shield to give to the peasant and sold Leonardo's for 100 ducats to a Florentine art dealer, who then sold it to the Duke of Milan. During the First Florentine era, 1472–1482, Leonardo, who was 20 years old when he achieved master status in the Guild of St. Luke, an organization for painters and physicians, continued to work and live with Verrocchio even after his father had established him in his workshop because of their strong bond. A pen and ink drawing of the Arno Valley from 1473 is Leonardo's earliest piece with a known date. Vasari claims that Leonardo, being a young man, was the first to advocate using the Arno River as a canal for shipping between Florence and Pisa. As a sign of his independence from Verrocchio's studio, Leonardo was given a free contract to paint an altarpiece for the Chapel of St. Bernard at the Palazzo Vecchio in January 1478. An early biographer, who goes by the name Anonimo Gadiano, asserts that Leonardo lived with the Medici in Florence in 1480 and frequently worked in the garden of the Piazza San Marco, where the Medici's Neoplatonic Academy of poets, artists, and philosophers gathered. He was given a commission for the Adoration of the Magi by the monks of San Donato in Scopto in March 1481. Both of these early projects were shelved when Leonardo traveled to Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, to offer his skills. In a letter to Sforza, Leonardo listed his many accomplishments in the domains of engineering and weapon design. He also indicated that he could paint. He had a horse head-shaped lute or lyre made of silver that he carried with him. When Leonardo visited the Medici residence with Alberti, he got to know some of the more established humanist philosophers, among them John Argyropoulos, an Aristotelian translator and teacher of Greek, Cristofor Landino, a proponent of Neoplatonism, and Marsiglio Ficino. Leonardo's contemporary, the bright young poet and philosopher Pico della Mirandola, was also a member of the Medici Platonic Academy. Until Ludovico il Moro, who ruled Milan from 1479 until 1499, Lorenzo de' Medici dispatched Leonardo as an ambassador in 1482. Benoit Madonna, c. 1478–1481. Hermitage, St. Petersburg sketch of Bernardo Bandini Baron Celis, hanging, 1479 First Milanese period, CE. 1482–1499. Ginevra di Benci, c. 1474–1480. National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. Madonna of the Carnation, c. 1472–1478. Alte Pinakothek, Munich landscape of the Arno Valley. Leonardo worked in Milan from 1482 until 1499. His Virgin of the Rocks, c. 1483–1493 is the Louvre version. He was asked to paint the Last Supper for the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie and the Virgin of the Rocks for the Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception. King Matthias Corvinus, hired Leonardo to paint a Madonna after he met with him in Hungary in the spring of 1485 while acting on behalf of Sforza. Together with Francesco di Giorgio Martini, he was enlisted as a consultant in 1490 for the cathedral construction site at Pavia. While there, he was struck by the equestrian statue of Regisol and sketched it. Leonardo worked for Sforza on numerous other projects, including the creation of floats and pageants for special occasions, a drawing and wooden model for a competition to design the cupola for Milan Cathedral, and a model for a sizable equestrian monument to Francesco Sforza, Ludovico's father. This became known as the Gran Cavallo and would have dwarfed the only two substantial equestrian statues of the Renaissance, Donatello's Gattamelata in Padua and Verrocchio's Bartolomeo Colonna in Venice. In November 1494, Ludovico handed the medal to his brother-in-law so that it could be used to build a cannon to protect the city against Charles VII of France. Leonardo had finished a model for the horse and created elaborate plans for its casting. The Duke of Milan hired Leonardo and his associates to paint the Sala delle Asse in the Sforza castle, according to contemporaneous letters. In 1498, the ornamentation was finished. The undertaking turned into a trompe-l'oeil decor that gave the impression that the Great Hall was covered in a pergola formed of the intertwined branches of 16 mulberry trees, whose canopy included a complex labyrinth of leaves and knots on the ceiling. When France overthrew Ludovico Sforza in 15, Leonardo escaped Milan for Venice with the help of his assistant Sala and friend, the mathematician Luca Pacioli. The Virgin and Child with Saint Anne and Saint John the Baptist, c. 1499-1508, National Gallery, London. Leonardo worked in Venice as a military architect and engineer, coming up with strategies to protect the city against naval assault. As guests of the Servite monks at the monastery of Santissima Annunziata upon his return to Florence in 15, he and his family were given access to a workshop where, according to Vasari, Leonardo painted the cartoon of the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne and Saint John the Baptist. This work attracted such admiration that men and women, young and old, flocked to see it as if they were going to a solemn festival. Leonardo began working for Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI at Cesena in 1502, serving as his military architect and engineer while touring Italy with his patron. To gain Cesare Borgia's support, Leonardo drew a town plan of Imola and a map of his stronghold. When Cesare saw it, he appointed Leonardo as his main military architect and engineer. Later that year, to provide his patron with a better map of the area and a more advantageous strategic position, Leonardo created a map of the Chiana Valley in Tuscany. He made this map in conjunction with his second endeavor, building a dam from the sea to Florence so that the canal would always have a supply of water. By the beginning of 1503, Leonardo had left Borgia's employ and was back in Florence. On October 18 of the same year, he rejoined the Guild of St. Luke. By the end of the same month, Leonardo had started a picture of Lisa del Giocondo, who served as the inspiration for the Mona Lisa, which he would continue to complete up to his advanced age. He was a member of the committee appointed in January 1504 to suggest a location for Michelangelo's statue of David. The Battle of Anghiari mural at the Signoria was later designed and painted by him over 2 years in Florence, with Michelangelo creating its companion piece, the Battle of Cassina. Leonardo was invited to Milan in 1506 by Charles I d'Amboise, the temporary French administrator of the city. There, Leonardo also took on Count Francesco Melzi, a Lombard aristocrat's son who is regarded as his favorite pupil. The Council of Florence wanted Leonardo to return right once to complete the Battle of Anghiari, but Louis XII, who who was considering hiring the artist to paint some portraits, insisted that he be given leave. A wax model of the equestrian statue of d'Amboise that Leonardo may have started still exists, and, if real, is the only example of his work that has survived. Otherwise, Leonardo was free to pursue his interests in science. Many of Leonardo's most well-known students, such as Bernardino Luini, Giovanni Antonio Boltraffio, and Marco da Giorno, either knew him or collaborated with him in Milan. Leonardo was in Florence in 1507, resolving a conflict with his brothers about his father's fortune, who had passed away in 1504. By 1508, Leonardo had returned to Milan and was residing in his own home in the Porta Oriental neighborhood of the Santa Babila parish. A confederation of Swiss, Spanish, and Venetian armies invaded Milan in 1512 and forced the French out, delaying Leonardo's plans for an equestrian monument for Gian Giacomo Trivulzio. In 1513, Leonardo remained in the area and resided at the Medici family's Ve Priodetta mansion for several months. France and Rome, 1513-19. Near the end of his life, Leonardo drew an image of an apocalyptic flood in black chalk. In March 1513, Giovanni de' Medici, the son of Lorenzo de' Medici, was elected pope. As Leo XA, Leonardo traveled to Rome in September and was welcomed by Giuliano, the pope's brother. Leonardo lived much of the time in the Apostolic Palace's Belvedere courtyard, where Michelangelo and Raphael were working, from September 1513 until September 1516. Vasari claims that Leonardo, who received a monthly allowance of 33 ducats, embellished a lizard with quicksilver-dipped scales. The Pope offered him a commission for an unknown subject painting, but later canceled it since the artist began working on a new sort of varnish. Leonardo became unwell, maybe the first of several strokes that ultimately caused his death. He worked as a botanist in the Vatican city gardens and was given the task of creating designs for the pontiff's projected draining of the Pontine marshes. Additionally, he dissected corpses and made notes for a book on vocal cords. He gave these materials to a representative to win back the Pope's favor, but he was unsuccessful. King Francis, I retook Milan in October 1515. At Francis I and Leo X's meeting on December 19 in Bologna, Leonardo was present. Leonardo joined Francis' service in 1516 and was allowed access to the Clos Luc Manor House, which is close to the king's residence at the Royal H-Toad d'Amboise. Francis frequently visited him, and he created a mechanical lion that, during a pageant, went toward the king and opened its chest to reveal a bouquet of lilies when struck by a wand. He also drew blueprints for the enormous castle town the king intended to build at Romorentin. Francesco Melzi, Leonardo's apprentice and friend, was with him throughout this time, and he was also receiving a 10,000 scudi pension. The only other portraits of Leonardo that are known to have been created during his lifetime are the one that Melzi sketched at some point and two drawings by Giovanni Ambrogio Figino that show an elderly Leonardo with his right arm covered in garments. The latter corroborates a narrative of Leonardo's right hand becoming paralyzed when he was 65, which may explain why he left works like the Mona Lisa incomplete, in addition to the record of a visit by Louis de Regan of a visit by Louis d'Aragon in October 1517. He kept working till he eventually fell ill and was confined to bed for a while. At the age of 67, Leonardo passed away in Clos Luc on May 2, 1519, possibly from a stroke. Francis and I had grown close. Vasari reports that in his final days, Leonardo sent for a priest to make his confession and to receive the Holy Sacrament. Vasari writes that Leonardo lamented on his deathbed, full of repentance, that he had offended against God and men by failing to practice his art as he should have done. Vasari also states that the monarch held Leonardo's head in his arms as he passed away, though this may be only a fable. According to his instructions, 60 begging men holding candles accompanied Leonardo's coffin. The mayor and executor, Melzi, received Leonardo's paintings, tools, library, and personal items in addition to the money. Half of Leonardo's vineyards were divided between his servant Battista de Villanes and his longtime student and friend, Sala. His servant lady was given a fur-lined mantle, and his brothers each received land. Leonardo's bones were laid to rest at the Collegiate Church of Saint Florentin at the Hôtel d'Amboise on August 12, 1519. Francesco Melzi Sala, also known as Il Salino, entered Leonardo's household around 1490 and worked as an assistant on a drawing of the Hôtel d'Amboise. Leonardo produced a list of his transgressions after just a year, describing him as a thief, a liar, stubborn, and a glutton after he had stolen money and valuables at least 5 times and spent a fortune on clothing. However, Leonardo gave him a lot of tolerance and allowed him to live with him for the following 30 years. Although Vasari asserts that Leonardo taught him many things about painting, Sala produced several works under the name Andrea Sala. However, his work is typically regarded as having less aesthetic worth than that of other students of Leonardo, such as Marco Doggiono and Boltraffio. At the time of Leonardo's death, in 1524, Sala was the owner of the Mona Lisa, and in his testament, it was valued at 505 lire, an astronomically expensive sum for a little panel portrait. Francis reportedly said, approximately 20 years after Leonardo passed away, there had never been another man born in the world who knew as much as Leonardo, not so much about painting, sculpture, and architecture, as that he was a very great philosopher. Benvenuto Cellini was a goldsmith and artist. Leonardo da Vinci's personal life is the focus of this essay. C. 1507-1516, Saint John the Baptist, Louvre. Sala is supposed to have served as Leonardo's model. Leonardo rarely discussed his personal life, despite the thousands of pages he left in notes and writings. Vasari's description of Leonardo's great physical beauty and infinite grace, as well as all other facets of his existence, piqued people's interest throughout his lifetime. Leonardo also gained attention for his outstanding inventive abilities. One of these characteristics was his love of animals, which probably included his vegetarianism, and, according to Vasari, his practice of buying caged birds and releasing them. The mathematician Luca Pacioli, with whom Leonardo co-wrote the book Divina Proportionate in the 1490s, is one of several of his friends who are now well known in their areas or for their historical relevance. Except for his connection with Cecilia Gallerani and the 2 Este sisters, Beatrice and Isabella, Leonardo doesn't seem to have had many intimate interactions with women. He sketched an image of Isabella while traveling through Mantua, which appears to have been used to construct a lost painted picture. Beyond friendship, Leonardo hid the details of his personal life. His sexual orientation has been the focus of ridicule, research, and conjecture. In the 19th and 20th centuries, this fashion was recreated, most famously by Sigmund Freud in Leonardo da Vinci, A Memory of His Childhood, which dates back to the mid-16th century. The closest relationships Leonardo had were probably with Sala and Melzi, 2 of his students. Leonardo had both intense and loving feelings for his students, according to Melzi, who wrote to inform Leonardo's brothers of his passing. Since the 16th century, it has been asserted that these interactions were sexual or erotic. Leonardo and 3 other young men were charged with sodomy in an event involving a well-known male prostitute in 1476, according to court records, when he was 24 years old. There is suspicion that because one of the accused, Leonardo di Tornabuoni, was connected to Lorenzo de' Medici, the family used their clout to win the discharge of the charges because there was insufficient evidence to support them. Since then, a lot has been written about his alleged homosexuality and how it affected his artwork, particularly the androgyny and eroticism that are overtly depicted in several pornographic works, as well as St. John the Baptist and Bacchus. Paintings, despite the recent recognition and awe of Leonardo as a scientist and inventor for the better part of 400 years, his fame hinged on his accomplishments as a painter. A few of the certified or attributed works to him have been hailed as some of the greatest masterpieces. These paintings are renowned for several characteristics that have been heavily reproduced by students and extensively analyzed by critics and connoisseurs. Leonardo was already referred to as a divine painter by the 1490s. Leonardo's innovative painting methods, thorough knowledge of anatomy, light, botany, and geology, interest in physiognomy and how people express emotion through gesture and expression, innovative use of the human form in figurative compositions, and subtle use of tone are just a few of the characteristics that set his work apart. His most well-known paintings, the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, and the Virgin of the Rocks, combine all these traits. Initial works: Leonardo's Annunciation, c. 1472-1476, located in the Uffizi, is considered to be his oldest major work still in existence. The Baptism of Christ, a painting Leonardo collaborated on with Verrocchio, is what first attracted attention to him. Two other pieces, both Annunciations, seem to be from the time he spent working in Verrocchio's studio. One is little, measuring 14 cm, 5.5 in, high by 59 centimeters, 23 in length. It is a predella that belongs at the bottom of a bigger composition in a Lorenzo di Credi painting, from which it has been torn. The other piece is 217 km, 85 in, long, and significantly larger. Similar to two well-known paintings by Fra Angelico of the same subject, Leonardo used a formal arrangement in both Annunciations, showing the Virgin Mary sitting or kneeling to the right of the painting and being approached from the left by an angel in profile who is wearing a rich, flowing garment, has raised wings, and is carrying a lily. Although the larger work was once credited to Ghirlandaio, Leonardo is now largely accepted as the author. In the smaller painting, Mary makes a gesture of submission to God's will by averting her eyes and folding her hands. However, Mary is not obedient in the bigger picture. When this unexpected messenger interrupts the girl as she is reading, she marks the spot in her Bible with her finger and lifts her hand in a polite greeting or expression of surprise. This composed young lady seems to accept her role as the Mother of God with confidence rather than resignation. The humanist aspect of the Virgin Mary is depicted in this painting by the young Leonardo, who acknowledges the part played by humans in the incarnation of God. Artwork from the 1480 C. Leonardo began St. Jerome in the Wilderness, an incomplete piece that was of groundbreaking compositional significance in the 1480s and never finished it. It is currently housed in the Vatican. Two of the three projects were never completed, and because the third took so long, there were protracted discussions about completion and payment. St. Jerome in the Wilderness was one of these paintings, which Bortolon links to a trying time in Leonardo's life, as evidenced by his diary entry. "I thought I was learning to live. I was only learning to die." Although the painting is barely started, the composition is already very unusual. As a penitent, Jerome is depicted in the center of the image, somewhat off-center and from above. With one arm extended to the edge of the painting and his gaze directed in the opposite direction, his kneeling form assumes the shape of a trapezoid. J. Leonardo's anatomical studies are connected to this artwork, according to Wasserman. His emblem, a large lion with a double spiral on its body and tail that spans the bottom of the image area, sprawls across the foreground. The silhouetted person is set against a sketchy background of rocky rocks, which is another striking aspect. The Adoration of the Magi, a commission from the monks of San Donato, Ascopto, also features the daring exhibition of figure composition, landscape elements, and personal drama. About 250 by 250 centimeters in size, it has a complicated composition. Leonardo created a large number of sketches and preliminary studies, including a detailed linear perspective drawing of the background's collapsed classical architecture. The work was put aside when Leonardo traveled to Milan in 1482 at Lorenzo de' Medici's request to win over Lodovico il Moro. Lady with an ermine C. 1489-1491, Czartoryski Museum, Krak W, Poland, the Virgin of the Rocks. Commissioned in Milan for the Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception, is the third significant piece from this period. The de Predis brothers were to assist in the painting, which was intended to cover a sizable, intricate altarpiece. When the infant John the Baptist, who was being guarded by an angel, came across the Holy Family on the way to Egypt, Leonardo decided to depict this apocryphal period of the early life of Christ. The beautiful individuals bow in adoration around the child Christ. In the picture, which depicts a wild scene of tumbling rock and swirling water. Despite being relatively large, 200,120 chem, the picture is not nearly as intricate as the one the monks of San Donato commissioned, containing only 4 figures as opposed to roughly 50, and a rocky terrain rather than building features. The painting was eventually completed. In fact, there were 2 versions of it. One was kept in the Confraternity Church, while the other was sent to France by Leonardo. But it took until the following century for the brothers to receive their artwork and the de Predis to receive payment. The lady with an ermine, who is thought to be Ludovico Sforza's lover, Cecilia Gallerini, c. 1483-1490, is Leonardo's most outstanding portrait from this period. At a time when many portraits were still strictly in profile, the figure's stance in the picture stands out because the head is rotated at an angle substantially different from the torso. The ermine has symbolic significance, maybe referring to the sitter, or Ludovico, a member of the esteemed Order of the Ermine. Artwork from the 1490 C. Leonardo's most well-known work from the 1490s is The Last Supper, which was created for the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria della Grazie in Milan. It was completed between 1492 and 1498. It illustrates the time when Jesus just announced, "One of you will betray me," and the confusion that this revelation generated. It also represents the last dinner that Jesus shared with his disciples before his arrest and execution. Matteo Bandello, a writer who witnessed Leonardo at work, noted that on some days, the artist would paint non-stop from sunrise till nightfall before pausing to do so again for 3 or 4 days. Convent's prior was perplexed by this and pursued him until Leonardo requested Ludovico to step in. Vasari recounts how Leonardo warned the Duke that he might be forced to use the earlier work as a model after becoming concerned about his inability to accurately paint the faces of Christ and the traitor Judas. Leonardo had used tempera over a ground that was primarily gesso, creating a surface subject to mold and flaking. The painting was praised as a masterpiece of design and characterization, but it degraded quickly so that within a century, it was described by one viewer as completely ruined. Even yet, innumerable reproductions of the artwork have been created in a variety of media, making it one of the most frequently copied works of art. Leonardo painted the Trompe-l'oeil decoration of the Sala dell'As for the Duke of Milan in the Castello Sforzesco at the end of this period, in 1498. Paintings from the 1500s in the Salone dei Cinquecento, Hall of the 500, in the Palazzo Vecchio, Florence, Leonardo was given the assignment to paint the Battle of Anghiari. At the Battle of Anghiari in 1440, Leonardo created a dramatic composition showing 4 soldiers riding ferocious war horses, engaged in combat for control of a standard. The Battle of Cassina was painted on the other wall by Michelangelo. The only copy of Leonardo's original artwork that exists today was made by Rubens. The little portrait known as the Mona Lisa or La Gioconda, the Laughing One, was among Leonardo's creations in the 16th century. It is currently housed at the Louvre in Paris. It is possibly the most well-known painting in the world right now. Its notoriety stems mostly from the woman's enigmatic smile, which may have acquired this aspect because the smile's precise nature is obscured by the woman's modestly shaded lip and eye corners. Leonardo's sfumato, or smoke, is the name given to the shadowy appearance for which the work is known. The unadorned dress, in which the eyes and hands have no competition from other details. The dramatic landscape background, in which the world seems to be in a state of flux. The subdued coloring and the extremely smooth nature of the painterly technicolor are other characteristics of the painting. Vasari wrote that the smile was so pleasing that it seems more divine than human, and it was considered a wondrous thing that it was as lively as the smile of the living original. The flawless condition of preservation and the absence of any evidence of repair or overpainting is unusual in a panel painting of this period, according to Vasari, who said that the quality of the work would cause even the most confident master to despair and lose heart. Virgin and Child with Saint Anne is a work that Wasserman calls breathtakingly beautiful, and it continues the subject of figures in a landscape by placing the figure at an angle similar to that of Saint Jerome. The 2 characters that are superimposed in this picture are obliquely positioned, which gives it an interesting appearance. Mary is perched on Saint Anne, her mother S. knee. Christ child is playing roughly with a lamb as a symbol of his imminent sacrifice, and she leans forward to restrain him. Numerous artists, including Michelangelo, Raphael, Andrea del Sarto, Pontormo, and Correggio, were influenced by this widely imitated painting. The Venetian artists Tintoretto and Veronese adopted the compositional trends in particular. Drawings. Leonardo's alleged self-portrait from the Royal Library of Turin, Italy, dates to around 1510. Leonardo was a prolific draftsman who kept journals chock full of tiny sketches and minute drawings documenting anything that caught his eye. Along with the journals, there are numerous studies for paintings that can be used to date specific pieces like the Adoration of the Magi, the Virgin of the Rocks, and the Last Supper. The landscape of the Arno Valley, dated 1473, is his earliest known work and has a very detailed depiction of the river, the mountain Montelupo Castle, and the farmlands beyond it. His most well-known works include The Vitruvian Man, a study of human body proportions, the head of an angel for the Virgin of the Rocks in the Louvre, a botanical study of the Star of Bethlehem, and a large drawing of the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne and Saint John the Baptist in the National Gallery in London, measuring 160 by 100 cm and done in black chalk on colored paper. The Mona Lisa inspired delicate sfumato shading technique is used in this drawing. It is believed that Leonardo never created a picture from it. The Virgin and Child, with Saint Anne in the Louvre, bears the closest resemblance. Numerous studies that are typically referred to as caricatures are also interesting since, while being exaggerated, they seem to be based on observation of live models. According to Vasari, Leonardo would scout for interesting people to employ as models for some of his paintings. Numerous studies have been done on handsome young men with the so-called Grecian profile, a rare and highly coveted facial trait that is frequently connected with Sala. These faces are frequently put in contrast to a warrior's. Sala is frequently portrayed wearing a fancy dress outfit. It is well known that Leonardo created sets for pageants that they might be related to. Other, more minutely detailed drawings display studies of draperies. In his early works, Leonardo's ability to depict drapery underwent a noticeable development. Another image that is frequently replicated is a horrifying drawing by Leonardo from Florence in 1479 that depicts the body of Bernardo Baroncelli, who was hanged in connection with the murder of Giuliano, Lorenzo de' Medici's brother, as part of the Pazzi plot. Leonardo noted the hues of the robes that Baroncelli was sporting when he passed away in his notes. A number of the centrally planned churches that Leonardo experimented with are depicted in his diaries as both plans and perspectives. However, none of them were built, like those of his contemporaries, Donato Bramante and Antonio de Sangallo the Elder. Journals and notes list of Leonardo da Vinci's works. Manuscripts. Renaissance humanism did not recognize the sciences and the arts as having mutually exclusive polarities, and Leonardo's studies in science and engineering are sometimes regarded as equally impressive and innovative as his artistic work. 13,000 pages of notes and sketches that combine art and scientific philosophy serve as a record of these studies. Throughout Leonardo's life and travels, he created and updated them daily as he made observations of his surroundings. A huge variety of interests and preoccupations can be seen in Leonardo's notes and sketches, from the ordinary, such as lists of groceries and debtors, to the interesting, such as ideas for wings and shoes for walking on water. There are compositions for paintings, studies of drapery and details, portraits of people and their emotions, animal dissections, plant studies, whirlpools, and rock formations, as well as studies of architecture, war machines, flying machines, and flying machines. These notebooks, which were initially just loose papers of various sizes and sorts, were mostly given to Leonardo's student and heir, Francesco Melzi, following his passing. These needed to be published, which was a daunting task, given the magnitude and Leonardo's eccentric writing style. Around 1570, a Milanese artist who wishes to remain unnamed replicated a few of Leonardo's sketches for a thesis on art. The collection was given to Orazio, a lawyer after Melzi died in 1570, but at first he showed little interest in the diaries. 13 of the manuscripts were carried to Pisa in 1587 by Lelio Gavardi, a tutor for the Melzi family. Giovanni Magenta reprimanded Gavardi for taking the manuscripts illegally and had them returned to Orazio. Orazio gave the volumes to Magenta because he had many more of this kind of writing. As word of these Leonardo's lost works spread, Orazio found 7 of the artist's original 13 manuscripts, giving them to Pompeo Leone for publishing in 2 volumes, one of which being the Codex Atlanticus. The other 6 paintings had been given out to a select group of people. The rest of Leonardo's belongings were distributed after Orazio's passing because his heirs sold them. Some works have made their way into important collections, including the British Library in London, which has made a selection from the Codex Arundel online, the Royal Library at Windsor Castle, the Louvre, the Biblioteca Nazionale di Hispania, the Biblioteca Nazionale di Hispania, the Biblioteca Ambrosiana. In Milan, which holds the 12-volume Codex Atlanticus. Additional locations for the works include Holcomb Hall, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and John Nicholas Brown, I. and Robert Lefman's private collections. The Codex Leicester, held by Bill Gates and exhibited once a year in various places across the world, is the only privately owned significant scientific work by Leonardo. Leonardo wrote most of his works in mirror image cursive. Since Leonardo wrote with his left hand, writing from right to left was probably simpler for him. Leonardo indicated in his notes that he meant to prepare them for publication and utilized a variety of shorthand and symbols. A single topic is frequently treated in depth in both words and pictures on a single page, delivering information that would not be lost if the pages were published out of sequence. It is unknown why they were not released during Leonardo's lifetime. Leonardo da Vinci's scientific discoveries are the focus of this essay. Leonardo's approach to science was observational. He tried to comprehend a phenomenon by describing and portraying it in as much detail as possible, without emphasizing experiments or theoretical explanations. From the cuboctahedron, as it appeared in Pacioli's Divina Proportion, 1509, Leonardo the scientist was largely neglected by modern scholars due to his lack of formal education in Latin and mathematics, though he did teach himself Latin. He studied mathematics under Luca Pacioli in the 1490s and prepared a series of drawings of regular solids in a skeletal form to be engraved as plates for Pacioli's book Divina Proportio, which was published in 1509. His keen observations in many areas were noted, such as when he wrote Il Sol non si move, the sun does not move. He examined light from the top of Monte Rosa while residing in Milan. His scientific notes about fossils in his notebook have been credited with shaping early paleontology. His journal entries indicate that he was preparing several treatises on various topics. The secretary of Cardinal Louis d'Oragon allegedly saw a cohesive anatomy treatise during a visit in 1517. A treatise on painting, including engravings based on drawings by the classical painter Nicolas Poussin, was eventually published in Germany in 1724 and in France and Italy in 1651, after Melzi collected parts of his work on the studies of anatomy, light, and the landscape for publishing. While Leonardo's experimentation followed scientific methods, a recent and thorough analysis of Leonardo as a scientist by Fritjof Capra argues that Leonardo was a fundamentally different kind of scientist from Galileo, Newton, and other scientists who followed him in it as a Renaissance man. His theories were based on a more humanistic perspective than those of these scientists. Biology and anatomy. Arm anatomy study, about 1510. Human brain and skull, as shown physiologically by Leonardo, K. 1510, Leonardo began his study of human anatomy while serving as Verrocchio's apprentice. Verrocchio insisted that his pupils get a thorough understanding of the subject. He soon mastered topographic anatomy as an artist, producing several studies of muscles, tendons, and other readily visible anatomical characteristics. At Florence's Hospital of Santa Maria Nuova and later in Milan and Rome, hospitals permitted Leonardo to dissect human corpses due to his success as an artist. He worked on his studies with Dr. Marcantonio della Torre, a professor of anatomy at the University of Pavia from 1510 to 1511. Over 240 intricate paintings and 13,000 words were written by Leonardo for an anatomical treatise. Leonardo's treatise on painting only included a small portion of the anatomy content. They were inspected by several anatomists and artists, including Vasari, Cellini, and Albrecht D. Reer, who drew several drawings from them during the time that Melzi was organizing the content into chapters for publication. Numerous studies of the human skeleton and its components, as well as of muscles and sinews, can be found in Leonardo's anatomical drawings. He conducted research on the skeleton's mechanical operations and the muscle forces acting on it that foreshadowed the field of biomechanics as we know it today. He created one of the first scientific illustrations of a fetus in gestation by sketching the heart, the vascular system, the sex organs, and other internal organs. If published, the illustrations and notation would have surely made a significant contribution to medical knowledge because they are far ahead of their time. Leonardo also paid special attention to and documented how aging and human emotion affected physiology, focusing in particular on the impacts of wrath. He sketched a lot of people with pronounced facial malformations or symptoms of the disease. Leonardo also examined and depicted the anatomical structures of many different animals, dissecting cows, birds, primates, bears, and frogs, and contrasting the human anatomy with that of each in his works. He conducted numerous experiments on horses as well. The physiology and mechanics of movement became better understood because of Leonardo's dissections and documentation of muscles, nerves, and blood vessels. He made an effort to pinpoint the origin of emotions and how they are expressed. Although he struggled to adopt the conventional system and beliefs of bodily humors, he eventually gave up these physiological justifications for how the body works. He noted that humors were not found in the brain ventricles or spaces. He provided evidence that the humors were not present in the liver or the heart, and that the circulatory system was characterized by the heart. Atherosclerosis and liver cirrhosis were originally defined by him. Melted wax was used to produce models of the brain ventricles, and he built a glass aorta to analyze blood flow patterns through the aortic valve using water and grass seed. Inventions and engineering. A flying machine design that was initially published in the Codex on the Flight of Birds around 1488. Leonardo was regarded as a skilled engineer during his lifetime. An aerial screw from the Codex Atlanticus, c. 1489, resembles a helicopter. Leonardo studied and created numerous tools and devices using the same analytical and rational mindset that inspired him to portray the human body and research anatomy. He depicted their anatomy with an unmatched level of competence, creating the first technical drawing in the modern sense, complete with an idealized exploded view method to portray internal components. His codices, which contain the studies and initiatives, total more than 5,000 pages. He claimed to be able to build many machinery for siege and city defense in a letter dated 1482 to Milan's Lord Ludovico il Moro. In 1499, he fled from Milan to Venice, where he worked as an engineer and created a system of mobile barricades to defend the city. He developed a plan to change the course of the Arno River in 1502, a project in which Niccolo Machiavelli also engaged. While with Louis XI, and Francis I.E., he continued to consider the canalization of the plains of Lombardy, as well as the Loire and its tributaries. Leonardo's papers contain a large number of innovations, both practical and impractical. They consist of steam cannons, finned mortar shells, hydraulic pumps, a mechanical knight, reversible crank mechanisms, and musical instruments. Drawings by Leonardo of a chariot with scythes and a fighting machine. Leonardo spent a large portion of his life being fascinated by the phenomenon of flight. He produced numerous studies, such as the Codex on the Flight of Birds, circa 1505, as well as designs for several flying machines, such as a flapping ornithopter and a machine with a helical rotor. Leonardo's concepts for a parachute and a massive crossbow were interpreted and built in the 2003 program Leonardo's Dream Machines by British television station Channel 4. When tested, some of those concepts performed well, while others did not. The 2009 American television series Doing Da Vinci included 10 vehicles created by Leonardo, including a battle vehicle and a self-propelled cart. More than 100 innovations that are credited to Leonardo have older prototypes, according to research conducted by Mark van den Broek. Leonardo's depictions and sketches from the Middle Ages, classical Greece and Rome, the Chinese and Persian empires, and Egypt share similarities that imply many of his innovations were created long before his time. The originality of Leonardo's work was to put various functions from earlier drafts into situations that demonstrated their usefulness. He made something fresh by rearranging technical innovations. The rules of sliding friction were first recorded by Leonardo in his notebooks in 1493. His research on perpetual motion, which led him to the right conclusion that it was not possible, served as some of the inspiration for his study of friction. The friction laws were not rediscovered until 1699 by Guillaume Amontons, with whose name they are now most frequently associated. His findings were never published. Leonardo was chosen by Duncan Dawson as the first of the 23 men of tribology for his contribution. List of things named after Leonardo da Vinci and allusions to Leonardo da Vinci in popular culture. Although he had no formal academic training, many historians and scholars regard Leonardo as the leading example of the universal genius or Renaissance man, an individual of unquenchable curiosity and feverishly inventive imagination, and one of the most talented people to have ever lived. Scholars interpret his view of the world as being based on logic, though the empirical methods he used were unorthodox for his time. According to art historian Helen Gardner, the scope and depth of his interests were unmatched in recorded history, and his mind and personality seemed to us superhuman, while the man himself mysterious and remote. Because of Leonardo's reputation during his existence, it is said that the King of France carried him away as a prize, cared for him as he aged, and held him in his arms as he passed away. The fascination with Leonardo and his creations has never subsided. People still line up to view his most famous pieces of art. His most well-known drawing can still be found on t-shirts, and authors continue to praise him as a genius, while speculating about his personal life and the beliefs of someone of such intelligence. Numerous more written homages to Leonardo show the enduring respect he received from critics, historians, and painters. The courtier's author, Baldassare Castiglione, stated in 1528, "Another of the greatest painters in this world looks down on this art in which he is unequaled." The biographer known only as Anonimo Gadiano stated in or around 1540, his genius was so rare and universal that it can be said that nature worked a miracle on his behalf. Vasari begins his biography of Leonardo in his Lives of the Artists, 1568. Everyone agreed that Leonardo da Vinci, a brilliant artist with exceptional physical beauty, demonstrated infinite grace in whatever he did and had honed his genius to such a dazzling degree that he was able to easily answer any difficulties he studied. The Death of Leonardo da Vinci by Ingres, 1818. The dawn of modern art was when Leonardo da Vinci burst forth with a splendor that distanced previous excellence, made up of all the elements that constitute the essence of genius, as Henry Fuseli wrote in 1801. This is echoed by according to Rio, who stated in 1861, "He towered above all other artists through the strength and the nobility of his talents." The extent of Leonardo's notebooks and his paintings were both generally recognized by the 19th century. There may not be in the world an example of another genius so universal, incapable of fulfillment, so full of yearning for the infinite, so naturally refined, so far ahead of his century and the following centuries, Hippolyte Taine wrote in 1866. Leonardo is the only artist of whom it can be claimed with absolute literalness. Nothing that he touched but converted into an object of timeless beauty, according to art historian Bernard Berenson in 1896. Whether it was the anatomy of a weed, the cross-section of a skull, or a study of muscles, he eternally transformed it into values that communicate life through line, light, and shade. Experts continue to examine and translate Leonardo's writings, analyze his paintings using scientific methods, debate attributions, and look for works that have been recorded but never located as evidence of his genius. In a 1967 article, Liana Bortolon stated, Leonardo can be considered quite rightly to have been the universal genius par excellence, and with all the disquieting overtones inherent in that term. His diversity of interests propelled him to investigate every branch of knowledge. When faced with a genius, man feels just as uneasy as he did in the 16th century. Despite the passage of 5 centuries, we continue to be in awe of Leonardo. At the University of California, Los Angeles, there is a unique collection called the Elmer Belt Library of Vinciana. Author Walter Isaacson of the 21st century based a large portion of his biography of Leonardo on thousands of notebook entries, studying the individual notes, sketches, budget notations, and musings of the man who he believes to be the greatest of innovators. Leonardo Museum in Vinci, which houses a large collection of models built based on Leonardo's drawings. Isaacson was very aback to learn that Leonardo had a fun, joyous side, in addition to his boundless curiosity and creative genius. The Louvre in Paris organized the largest ever single exhibit of Leonardo's artwork, titled Leonardo, to run from November 2019 to February 2020 in honor of the 500th anniversary of his passing. Over 100 paintings, drawings, and notebooks are on display. There were 11 paintings that Leonardo finished throughout his lifetime. The Louvre owns 5 of them, but the Mona Lisa was left out because of how popular it is with public tourists and is still on exhibit in the gallery. But after a legal dispute with its owner, the Gallery dell'Accademia in Venice, Vitruvian Man, is now on exhibit. Additionally, Salvator Mundi was excluded because its Saudi owner refused to lease the piece. The Mona Lisa, widely recognized as Leonardo's masterpiece, is frequently referred to as the most well-known portrait ever created. The Last Supper is the religious artwork that has been copied the most, and Leonardo's Vitruvian Man picture is regarded as a cultural classic. Alessandro Vezzosi and Agnesi Sabato completed their investigation of Leonardo's genetic lineage in the middle of 2021 after more than 10 years of work. The artist has 14 living male relations, it was found. The research may potentially be able to confirm or deny the validity of Leonardo-related artifacts. Location of bones. While it is established that Leonardo was interred on August 12, 1519, in the College Church of St. Florentin at the H2 d'Amboise, it is unknown where his bones are now. The church was demolished in 1802 after the French Revolution caused significant damage to H2 d'Amboise. The location of Leonardo's remains is unknown because some of the tombs were demolished during the process, scattering the bones buried there. A gardener may have even deposited part of the bones in a courtyard corner. Ars New Husay, a fine arts inspector general, was given an imperial commission to excavate the site in 1863. He found a partially complete skeleton with a bronze ring on one finger, white hair, and stone fragments bearing the inscriptions EOARDUS and VINC, which were interpreted to form Leonardo's Vinci. The 8 teeth on the skull indicate that the person was around the same age, and a silver shield discovered close to the bones shows a beardless Francis I.E. which is consistent with the monarch's look while Leonardo was in France. Houssaye asserted that Leonardo's unusually large skull was a sign of his brilliance. This is referred to as a dubious phrenological deduction by author Charles Nicholl. The feet were pointed toward the high altar, a procedure often reserved for laymen, and the 1.73-meter, 5.7-foot skeleton seemed abnormally short, among other problems with Houssaye's views. According to art historian Mary Margaret Heaton, Leonardo would have been a good fit for the height in 1874. Before being brought back to the H2 d'Amboise and reburied in the chapel of St. Hubert in 1874, the skull is said to have been handed to Napoleon. Contents of the grave are only assumed to be those of Leonardo, according to a plaque above it. Since then, it has been hypothesized that Leonardo's right hand's paralysis may be represented by the skeleton's right arm draping over his head. It was announced in 2016 that DNA tests would be carried out to see whether the attribution is accurate. The DNA of the remains will be examined and may be analyzed in comparison to samples taken from Leonardo's work and the descendants of his half-brother Domenico. This is Astrid Insight Lab. Please hit the like and subscribe button for updates whenever we publish new episodes. 2019 saw the publication of documents that showed Houssaye had kept the ring and a hairpiece. These were sold by his great-grandson to an American collector in 1925. They were eventually purchased by another American 60 years later, and as a result, they will be on exhibit at the Leonardo Museum in Vinci beginning on May 2, 2019, the 500th anniversary of the artist's passing.